My guest today is Ryan Jones, Director of Product Management at Consensys. Ryan started his career in traditional finance at Goldman, then got the startup bug, founding Pixby, a company that was changing the way consumers and brands interact. Ryan joined Pivotal Labs in 2015 as a product manager, where he embraced the unique culture there and grew a team from scratch to over 200 people spanning across multiple countries. He got the Web3 bug in November 2021 when he joined Consensys, the iconic enterprise blockchain company operating Metamask and many other notable Web3 brands. We talk about what it takes to scale product teams and how Web3 is finally hitting a technological inflection point where mass adoption is inevitable. LFG baby, let's start vibing.
Zach French is a bar-certified attorney, and nothing expressed by Zach during Web3 with me shall be considered legal advice. All the opinions expressed by Zach and his guests are solely their own opinions. All content in Web3 with me is for informational purposes only. Zach and his podcast guests may maintain positions in the securities discussed during Web3 with me.
Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I've been super excited for this conversation. We have a mutual friend in Clinton Reeves from back at your Pivotal days that made the connection. And I've enjoyed getting to know you over a few calls before the episode. And I'm excited to dive in with you.
Yeah, it's been great. Looking forward to it.
So I usually start these episodes with letting my audience get to know who you are. I call it your founding story. So feel free to start wherever you'd like.
Cool. So maybe I'll start with my career in terms of where it started. I started in traditional finance, so at Goldman Sachs. Was there for about 4 years, managing multi-asset class portfolios on discretion. My undergrad was focused on finance and entrepreneurship. After that, I essentially what we call the Babson itch. Went and started a tech company with a good friend from college. After that, realized I wanted to stay in tech. I had no idea what I was doing. When we started that first company, so great learning experience. From there, I realized that I really wanted to better understand how everything functioned. Those who did really well over at Goldman had a background already in finance, so I thought, let me go understand how I can actually build an application and how then it'll work and so there. So I went to coding boot camp. I was the only person that decided not to become a software engineer. My options were to be like a bad software engineer or leverage my skill sets, hopefully somewhere else. And that's what drove product management. And so I ended up at a company called Pivotal Software, where I started in our consultancy side in Pivotal Labs. And the whole premise there was, if I am teaching other PMs how to be great product managers, hopefully that makes me a decent product manager. Did that for about a year, and then got tapped to go into our R&D group, where we were actually building a lot of products that were solving the problems for our consultancy clients, which was they could determine value and want to build out value pretty quickly in terms of new software products, but they couldn't actually release it quickly. And so it would take like 6 months to actually get a release out. And so we started building products where it changed that to literally 30 seconds. And that became like the major revenue driver for the company. And I got to build out a bunch of new products and teams and scale them from, say, like 10 or 13 people to 200. And I got to do that multiple times, which was awesome. And drive down revenues in like year one to over $100 million ARR for each of those products, which was great. So it was like a super unique experience, and there was no way I could leave that at the time. That ultimately helped us go public, and then we got acquired by VMware. During that time, I started to learn. So I learned about Bitcoin back in 2012. At that point, I had no technical background. Cryptocurrencies have been around before, so I was like, I don't know, this thing's weird. And I was over in traditional finance. I had no idea what I was doing, and it was really Ethereum that got me like interested. By then, I had some like technical background. I started writing smart contracts. I was like, wow, this is like programmable money. This is super interesting. And so on the side, I was doing kind of work in the crypto space while I was over at Pivotal, and I had a good friend who actually tried to get me to join Consensys probably like 5-6 years ago now, maybe a little longer. But I was in the midst of building all those products out over at Pivotal. And I was like, this is such a unique experience. I can't leave yet. And so after we got acquired by VMware and I was there for a year, that's when I started to question, like, why don't I just do what I'm doing nights and weekends full time? Ultimately, of course, looked around at a bunch of different companies, but picked Consensys. And so happy to talk about like kind of the why and all of that. But at Consensys, maybe real quick, I started as head of product for protocols team. We kind of realigned strategies around there, built out the product group. And so the protocols team is responsible for Ethereum clients, working with all core devs. We kicked off our new ZK VM called Linea. And then from there, I moved to what we call our direct users group to help out from the product perspective as well, which is Metamask Institutional, and staking operator, Consensys Staking. So currently focused on getting a few new products off the ground in that space, and super excited with what we're working on.
Wow, that was concise. I have to say, you really you went through it. We got every stage. Let me ask you this though. I mean, I don't think a lot of people will go learn how to write code and then decide not to be a software engineer. What was it about product management that kind of pulled you in?
Yeah, so I think the big parts there that were really interesting to me is one, I love building. So actually, I come from a family of builders, home builders to be exact. So like, grew up sucking wood chips out of walls before they could put the drywall on there during my summers. So yeah, I think I just love building. But for me, product management is really unique because it really sits in kind of the middle of both business, design, and engineering. And really, like the whole point of being a PM is you're there as service to others and supporting them to like get the best out of your team. And like I really enjoy like team sports as well. And bringing all those together in one place is like a really unique position, and that's what really enticed me to get into product management over anything else.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, product managers are CEO of whatever product they're in charge of, right? You're managing multiple teams to try to achieve a goal, which may include every team, right? Like at least one member from every team. I'm sure it doesn't always, I'm sure a lot of it's more like technical focus, but yeah, you kind of get that autonomy of being an entrepreneur inside of a company.
For sure. I do kind of stray away a bit from the like CEO mantra for a PM, because sometimes that could like determine that the CEO is in charge and they make the ultimate decisions on everything. Whereas a PM is a little bit more in that like service, and you're trying to get the right people to make those decisions. And ultimately, it does fall a lot on the PM. But a big thing when it comes to like Pivotal and the way that we would coach there is like shared ownership, right? And so like if something goes wrong or if something goes well, it should be on the entire team to work together and not just fall all the time onto the PM. And I think that's like a huge change for a lot of groups and a lot of teams. And I think that's like integral to like making very successful product teams.
Yeah. So you went to Pivotal and you were actually coaching other PMs on how to how did you transition into that role instead of just being a PM yourself?
Yeah, so Pivotal Labs, right, that was the whole premise. Like we were a consultancy firm, but what was unique is people would travel to us and work in our office. And so they would be flying from, we had people from Russia, Japan, Europe, and across the US, like literally fly to San Francisco, work in our office, work next to us for a series of weeks or even a few months. And the whole point there is that they wanted to get removed from their culture, from wherever they were, so that they could work in a totally different environment. And so what we'd do is we'd have our engineers pair program, we'd have our designers pair with their designers, and our PMs would pair with their PMs. And so you'd start off by like showing them how to do everything, and how like every company or product would have a problem that they were looking to solve or try to figure out. And so we would go through and leverage a bunch of different methodologies to actually go and accomplish it. And so, you would show them how to do it. You'd kind of watch them, coach them along the way, let them fail here and there. And then eventually by the end, they should be running 100% by themselves. And so you would essentially let that team go. They would go back to their kind of core offices and continue leveraging those skill sets. So it was a great learning environment because we got to try so many different things. We got to work across so many different like products and industries, and like the way in which you coach PMs, everyone's starting from a different place. So you spend the first like week to understand like what level they're at, and then how to coach them along the way to kind of like a lean product development sort of methodologies.
That's really cool. So there's an air of like professional and personal development that came along with working with the company at Pivotal.
Huge, huge. That was really what drove my all of my learnings. I would say I had like a very good mentor, Janice Frazier. Like she's an amazing product person, and like I learned a ton from her. She also, I'll maybe throw it out there. She just put out a new book worth a read. Yeah, Eric Reese does the foreword on it. Yeah, it's a great book. Yeah, and she helped a ton in terms of like my career and learnings as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So take me through your next step is you create you start with a team of 10 people and start to grow this to 200 people.
Yes.
What are you learning throughout this process? What is it that the skills that you may be inherent, like maybe had already, and what kind of new skills did you have to acquire to take it to that level?
Yeah, that's a great point. So it was a pretty unique situation, I would say. So maybe a little bit of a story to add to it. Two CEOs, Pivotal and VMware's CEO, got on stage and they said, "We are making a Kubernetes offering because the Kubernetes was essentially eating the world at that time, and we're going to have it out by this date." We had a very small team working on it. We were not going to hit those timelines, and it started over in Ireland. And so I was essentially voluntold. It was, "Do you want to go to Ireland to go see if we can get this timeline up and running?" And I said no. And they said, "You're going to Ireland to go get the timeline up and running." And
no, sir, you are going.
You are going. And it was great. I had an amazing experience. But yeah, so moved over to Ireland for essentially 6 months to start expanding the team. And ultimately, like when you're a PM, right, you have certain levers that you can pull. You can either, if you want to get all the scope in, you can essentially like push the timelines. And then, of course, more people doesn't necessarily mean faster. It takes some time to actually onboard them. Or the other one is you just completely cut scope. And so the joke was like we went in there with a hatchet and we destroyed the scope of exactly, just went straight through and we're like, what is the smallest thing that we can do to provide value to the customers that were essentially lining up for this offering? And like, what exactly did they need to just get up and running on day one? So that was the first part. And then because like of what we were building and the companies that we were building for, we did have a series of customers that were like ready to onboard. And so we knew we were going to scale this thing very quickly. And so the parts that I didn't actually realize were going to happen, and I think was like invaluable in terms of learnings, was at different team sizes, you need to have different structures. And you need to have like different ways that you operate in order to work efficiently. And so we went from essentially one team, right, of like 10 people to by the end, it must have been about 20 teams. And so how do you start scaling? And we had to start putting in leveling. And the time that we started shifting was you don't need a lot of structure if you're under 20 people. Once you hit about 30, then it changes the game in terms of how you have to structure. Another change and another shift is about 75. And then the next one is around like the 120, 130 mark. And like you do have to start putting in like line management, and you do have to start putting in a little bit more oversight, and you have to make sure that you have cascading intent. And so it's really, really fascinating to see how we had to do that, and we had to do it fast, right? Like all this happened in a year. So pretty much every quarter we were restructuring the teams. We were refiguring out like, how does this work? We were lucky because at Pivotal, we had a similar sort of, we had a 65 teams building like our core flagship product at the time. So we were able to leverage some of those learnings from that other group to pull them in and ask for feedback as we were scaling out of what worked and what didn't. And so that's why like I couldn't leave at that time, because it was just like such an amazing experience to like figure out and how to structure teams and all the pains that are associated with it, and like leveling up and bringing in PMs, which is such a unique experience. But yeah, I think the biggest part there is just realizing that there is a very different cadence and a very different structure depending on the size of your product group that you're actually going after.
Yeah, it's interesting. As I hear this, and this is definitely confirmation bias, so bear with me. I think of the power of decentralized versus centralized management. Was that a conversation that you were having when you were scaling?
Yeah, so I mean, this is an interesting one. This is certainly like stuff that we're trying to figure out at Consensys, and I do think like the experience has been helpful. We did go through a pretty big restructuring of Metamask, and it's a similar sort of setup where it was 13 people, and now Metamask is like 150, and before maybe there wasn't a lot of structure, and so now we were able to structure it. And the best teams are very much empowered product teams, right? You want to make sure that it's they are the ones that are able to go and make decisions and go drive value. But you do need to like make sure there's some form of an alignment. And so I tend to think like the best companies and best product groups are those that have both top down and bottoms up. The information and the degree of detail is of course going to be different depending on kind of which level that you sit at. Right? And so there should be aligned goals, aligned milestones, how everyone fits into that like strategy and vision, and then more data and information should be coming up from the bottom to then reassess and change if you need, or tell you if you need to change any form of strategy that's associated with it. And so, it's I think the premise of like everything needs to be decentralized, I don't agree with, right? Decentralization is a spectrum.
You're in good
It depends
company.
on like what part of the stack, yeah. And like I'm a big believer that like a hybrid model tends to be the one that always wins, right? Like you go one way too far or the other way too far, it's like never going to work. So like what parts can you take is really the ultimate challenge.
Yeah, I had a former guest that put it pretty eloquently in that he said it's efficiency versus resilience. When you're choosing between centralization and decentralization, respectively. So that's cool to hear from firsthand experience. Just out of curiosity, was the team distributed across the world, or were they local?
For like MetaMask or for Pivotal?
For Pivotal.
So that was an interesting one. So we started with pretty distributed. So we had like Ireland and the US. And then we did make the decision to pull the core of it all together in Palo Alto. And like it does make a pretty big difference, especially when you're building out a brand new product, to have everyone in the same room where you can just walk over. And so I think at that stage, we probably had about 80 people all in like one office in one location. And it wasn't a need to go there every day, but it was like it was before like COVID. It was a hybrid sort of environment. So it was like 3 days a week that everyone was kind of in that office, which made it much easier. But yeah, we tried to have everyone there, and then there would be some offshoots, right? And so it goes back to like, what are you doing and what are the teams that are involved? Anyone who's like part of the core does help to have them at least same time zones and working closely together. And then there's times where there's additional work that can be done that is a little separated, and that you can have a little bit more of a distributed team.
So you eventually bring them back in. I guess this is all happening over the course of a year, though, right? So yeah. Like, was Pivotal public at that time, by the way, or was it?
Pivotal was public. Yes.
Okay, so you had like some capital levers to pull on to fund something like that, because it's not cheap to get everybody to move to one area and get a big enough office space, especially in Palo Alto.
Yes. It was nice because it was a joint product between VMware and Pivotal, so it was essentially a blank check to get the thing up and running. Nice. So that certainly was nice to have. So yeah, we were able to spin the thing up super fast, and then we had, I think, something like 5,000 or 10,000 sales people that were able to start selling this thing as soon as we got it up and running. So it was a beast, which was helped just like put gasoline on the fire. It was awesome.
Yeah. What kind of role did you have as, leading one of these things in terms of like the go-to-market, like actually going and getting the salespeople and all that? Were you handing that over to somebody in the revenue side of things, or were you actually helping kind of scale that way too?
Yeah. So luckily, because there are existing companies, like they already had all the structures in place. But what we did is we of course had like a main salesperson that would go and work with the rest of the sales reps. And then we would spend a ton of time educating, of course, the sales reps on like, what is the value props? How do we sell this thing? Like, why is it like, what are customers actually wanting and why? And then examples of how customers are using it. And then another thing too was I was luckily able to do like an entire Asia trip. I think I flew something like 30,000 miles or something ridiculous. and I got to meet with a bunch of customers in every like major city, the same sort of thing, to go through like what it was that we were building or how to leverage it, and why it's different than all the other offerings out there, and like what our vision was for the future. And so, yeah, it was very much like trying to stay involved with customers. And we would have, I think something that was unique is we were building server infrastructure tech. And so like, this is, you're running like thousands of applications. And it got to a point where like, it wasn't possible, but if it went down, right, this is again, like distributed systems. If it went down, like the world would literally stop, right? Like hospitals are running on it, planes are running on it, your credit cards are running on it. Like everything would come to an end. And so it was interesting because usually a lot of those times you're moving super slow, right? A lot of companies would move slow in terms of getting some products out, but like we knew that we needed to iterate and iterate quickly. And so we had design partners, and so like a series of about 10 of them, and we would talk to them almost on a weekly basis. And we were putting out releases almost on a weekly basis as well. And so they were getting to the point where they're like, we need to slow down. So we did have to have like a more of like a monthly release cadence just to like allow for them to keep up. But that was also just a really unique kind of use case within the kind of server infrastructure tech and like the cadence and how closely you get to work with customers. And that was like what made it ultimately very successful.
So risk-adjusted product development. Got it.
Yeah.
It's a new kind. You know, I know we were formerly agile, lean methodologies. We got a lot riding on our shoulders, and we got to be a little bit more careful.
Yes. A lot of testing goes into everything before it can actually get released.
I love learning about that. Thanks for sharing all that. It's cool to see those experiences from, firsthand. And I can imagine what your frequent flyer mile account looked like after that year.
Luckily, I was much younger, so it is not as bad on me. But yeah, that was a lot of flying. But it was great. It was a great experience.
Awesome. Well, maybe we should talk about Web3 a little bit at some point on
Let's
here.
do it. Yeah.
It's the name of the show, but I just love to geek out on stuff like that. So, anyways, you said, Ethereum was your kind of impetus for becoming seriously interested. Were you reading the white paper in like 2015, or was that how you kind of got introduced to it?
Yeah, so I think it was a friend that brought it up, and they're like, "Hey, there's this thing, and you can like actually program it." And I was like, "Oh, this is fascinating." And I think with my background when it came to like finance, and then now the technical bent, bringing those two together like made it really unique. And I was like, "Oh wow, there's this way to do essentially like," and I love automation. Like it's nice when you can automate away a lot of things, and so like the whole automation portion of it mixed with the finance was a part that got me really really interested. It didn't, at the very beginning, of course, there wasn't a ton of known use cases. And so it felt a lot more like tinkering. And then there was a whole ICO craze that was happening. And people were asking me to write like smart contracts or whatever to like help them do their ICOs. And I was like trying to get to the bottom of like, what value are you actually creating and why are you creating this token? And like, no one had real answers. And I'm like, I'm not doing this.
This is not equity in a company, sir.
No, I'm not doing this just to take people's money for some random thing that makes no sense.
Was it friends or were you like in Discords? Like what was the environment like when you were going through that period?
Yeah, it was more Discords, and yeah, people would reach out. Like I would go to different like hackathons or sessions just to learn more about it. Because ultimately, like I also really love. I think the part that really gets me excited is the ability for you to essentially own your own money, like self-custodial your own assets, and in the future, right, be able to essentially determine who has access to what and who can do what. And that to me is like the most like interesting part because that is totally like the opposite of how the system works today. And like when I was working over at Goldman, like it's kind of crazy to think like you pretty much hand over the keys. Like the team that I was helping build out, like our average account size was like $80 million. And like these it was mostly nonprofits and endowments, and they would be like, here you go, like here's our entire endowment, and like they have zero control over it. And they would give us parameters that we would need to sit in. And I'm like, all of this could be done like through blockchain. And you can actually still have the ownership and still like an amount of things that people do with your money that you don't actually see or don't realize unless you're like really paying attention, like is scary.
You mean my money's not in my account? That may have been an issue recently at SVB.
Oh my gosh. I mean that and like and like if you're like private wealth advisors, they could be just buying different types of products, and like there could be fees associated with them, and they're hidden behind a bunch of things, and you're just like, you don't even have any idea what they're actually doing with your own money, and that's scary. So like, I think those are the parts that got me really excited, but it was before DeFi was there and all of that, and so I think people were just trying to figure out what to do with this thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people were, and a lot of the people that were introduced around your time were mostly interested because of that programmable aspect. They'd probably seen Bitcoin at some point and realized, oh, this is a great single use case, right, for digital money. But what happens when you can program like what a token represents?
Yes.
And that was Ethereum, and continues to be Ethereum, upon which you're still building on. So
Sure.
you get into it. What year did you leave Pivotal? When did you move over?
So I officially, I was over at VMware. I officially joined Consensys in 2021. So it's still relatively recent. I'd say I've been there for a little over a year and a half. But yeah, the year and a half feels like
you're like
a
an
long
OG,
time.
Man.
Yeah, feels like a long time.
You went to join Consensys. Was Consensys and Consensys Mesh still one thing at that point?
No,
or had they already?
So that was. Yeah, so that was recently after they finally like set up Consensys Software Inc., right? Which is like, we're going to build an actual tech company. We're going to leverage the things that worked really well during the mesh days, or I guess, during like original Consensys days. We're going to take Metamask.
We're going to try and confuse the audience as much as possible right now. Mesh, Consensys Mesh.
Yeah. There was Consensys and a hub and spoke system. And they just invested in a bunch of things. They took what worked, made it a software company, and then separated out like kind of the incubator and venture arm. That was already the separation that was there. And so I was coming in, and I think that was one of the parts that really excited me. Like, it is a new company, right? At that time, it was still pretty early, and like a lot of the growing pains were there. How do we actually structure a real software organization? And we were scaling up from, I think when I joined, it was like 350 people, and now we're at about 800. And so we're definitely like going through that scaling, figuring out how these different products fit together. And again, it like goes back to all the stuff I was doing at Pivotal. It's like, how do you structure for this size and for this growth? And it was like a very unique situation too, because you actually had a lot of companies come together. So you had different cultures, different ways of working. You had people who were CEOs of companies now coming together and trying to work together, and then having some form of like management on top of that. So that whole part took a while to kind of suss out.
So you went from Pivotal, where you, I mean, essentially were hiring a lot of these people, right, to grow the team, to another company where everybody had already been hired and they'd already kind of been in a single place. And I can imagine, some people put up a little bit of a fight, at least, about like what they wanted to see, and as the companies combined, and then the hierarchy, like the decision making, right? Like, how are you making decisions when you've got two people that are CEOs, and maybe one person has more people, but one person has more revenue, and which product's which brand's going to take the name, and all that. That's interesting. So you were helping with that, right? As you started to be in there, or were you just more focused heads down on the product?
Yeah. So I luckily came in, like most of that was figured out. There's still some parts. I think what was nice is everyone had the same ethos and vision, right? So like the way of working and maybe the timing or how we get there is different. And like now we're much more aligned, I would say. But the ethos of like, everyone's super passionate, right? And we have a ton of very smart people at Consensys, and they're all like very driven. And I think that helped, right? So like a lot of times people get pushed back the egos and go like, we're all going for the same thing. How do we make this work? And how do we make this work now in this bigger picture? And so, luckily when I came in, a lot of those structures were kind of set up at the point, but we were still doing too much, right? Like there's way too many things that we're going after, and we didn't have necessarily a ton of product managers at the company. And so that was kind of the part of how do we add product managers? What do we expect from our product managers? And then how do we like drive that focus and alignment across our different groups was really kind of the premise that I came into to help clarify, I would say. And so, joining on the protocol side, so the very bottom of the stack, pretty much like drove getting rid of our private private blockchains. And so something like Quorum, and really focus on the public permissionless aspect, and that aligned more with like our strategy and what we're doing on the Metamask and Infura side. And so like that was a whole big part too. So hiring a bunch of PMs, restructure, refocus us, get that ZK VM up and running, was really like what I tried to come into.
So the decision primarily came out of, all right, let's find what's more strategically aligned, public or private, and then you go the public route. What does the structure look like now?
Yeah. So so coming in, like it was more of this, like, let's have a product leader in the space and figure out where we should go. And so started by just talking to a bunch of people, and then also just like trying to understand like what is actually validated and what's not. So we're actually doing like most of Consensys's revenue before we added swaps to MetaMask was from the like large enterprises. And so it was very much from the private permission space. Like that was our bread and butter. So we had a ton of services. We were selling Quorum. Like that was where we were making the tens of millions of dollars. And then once swaps was added, we saw like exponential growth when it comes to MetaMask. And we started like that was really started to realize that there's a different way to approach this. And things like CBDCs, that's like a decade-long journey. And that's not something that, of course, we have time for. So it was very much like, okay, let's make sure that across the entire stack, and that's why Consensys is in a unique position where it has like all the way from the very bottom of the protocol all the way to the top, like MetaMask, has all those different components. Let's just make sure that we line them up. And so at this stage, right, we're only doing public permissionless. And so that's why we have our clients, Ethereum clients, Besu and Teku, and then we have our ZK VM Linea. And then we, of course, have R&D group that works closely with all core devs and just like tries to contribute to the Ethereum ecosystem to continue to drive it forward, which is a big part. And then on that stack, right, we have Infura and then we have MetaMask. And like that's like aligning that was a really big, I would say, effort. And anything outside of that, we essentially got rid of. So there's a bunch of products called Codify, didn't have a ton of validation that were associated with them. There were a bunch of like financial primitives, and essentially just end of lifed all those products as well. So I felt like I kind of did a similar thing. I felt like my entire first year was coming again with a hatchet, and just getting rid of
products. You guys, watch out. Right. You see Ryan coming into your company.
yeah.
I love that though. But they trusted you to do that, right? Because you had done something similar before and you knew you had the experience behind you, which also probably helped you make these critical business and strategic decisions the right way.
Yeah, it was. I think that was helpful, and everyone at Consensys was extremely supportive, and like very team oriented. And so I think that was huge. Some of the stuff too was already kind of in people's minds, but I helped kind of like push it over the edge, so that I didn't really like speed it up. So I think luckily we weren't doing anything at that time that was too far out there, and so I think that certainly helped. But it's just like, how do you actually approach it? How do you speed up that process? And like, what does good look like in terms of like team structures, and how do you go through some of these changes? Certainly my experience was helpful there.
Yeah. Going back to kind of the shared ethos, was that like kind of like we want to see this industry succeed ethos? We believe that it's going to add a lot of value, or was it like just being a part of Consensys already?
You're talking about in terms of like the ethos of individuals.
Yeah, you said you didn't have as hard of a time as you would think trying to integrate the ethos because everybody was kind of fighting for the same thing. Was that just kind of like the Web3 ethos, if you will?
Yeah, I would say it's a Web3 ethos, but it's like there's a lot of people that don't like the current systems or how they operate and think that they can be so much better. And it's really like people want to help others. Is a big part of it, and want to enable others. And so a lot, like everyone at Consensys has that like kind of dream and that vision that we can use this technology to make like our world a better place. And I think that just like makes it so much easier when everyone's on that same sort of like culture and vision. Then it breaks down to like, what is the right thing to do now? And because it is such an interesting technology that can be used in so many different ways, that makes it hard because there's a lot of sparkly objects. And so that's where all the like heated discussions come in. But with all that passion, right, you're going to get some heat that comes from it. which also makes it for a very interesting and enlightening space to be in.
Yeah, I mean, especially 2021, early 2022, sparkly objects were everywhere.
Everywhere.
which makes it, what a lot of people would say, and some might call it cliche, is that these are the best times to build because there's just not a lot of distraction, right? The signal noise ratio is completely different right now.
It's so, the amount of things that we were looking at and we were trying to be just stay focused and put the blinders on, and now it's much easier to stay focused on what we actually wanted to do and just continue to drive in that multi-year roadmap.
I'm going to ask a somewhat unrelated question, but just curious, because I've been trying to explain decentralized identity to a lot of people lately. And I know that you guys have a big, division dedicated to ZK and stuff like that. Would you be willing to take a stab at explaining that to the audience, exactly how something like that works, as if they have no idea what ZK stands for? Yeah, I think it'd be interesting.
Yeah, I'm curious on when you talk about decentralized identity, what aspect you mean? Because I'm happy to talk about the ZK EVM and kind of the premise of it. But I'm curious, there are different parts of identity that we're certainly looking at when it comes to Metamask and what it means for an individual. So yeah, curious kind of if you're able to talk a little bit more about that part.
Yeah, it's usually in the realm of access, right? So if I need to verify who I am, right, what aspects of my identity do you actually need, and not having those all stored in one place or having to fill them out every single time that you need to do a thing like park your freaking car. That is usually when it comes up. And honestly, I've had 3 or 4 people reach out for the show inbound lately around it. So I feel a lot of people are at least funded or are trying to build these companies. So I'm super interested in it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think from our perspective, identity is a huge premise, and we see the wallet as actually your form of identity. And so what does this mean in terms of online identity and then your connection to you as an actual individual in person, and how do you determine that? And the other part too is what data do you give to what sort of maybe institutions? And you don't want to make sure that your social security card is just sitting there right in front of everyone at all times. So I don't know if I would necessarily say the ZK VM is it is more of an enabler to have it's really for the scalability and cost sort of parts. And then it allows us to do essentially what we can do on mainnet on the L2. And so it allows for that same sort of programmability. But the part that we're really looking at is what does it mean when it comes to your individual wallet and the connections of both on-chain and off-chain data. And so this goes back to the hybrid approach, where you can go and you can have a way to, I'm trying to see think about the world in which there is a device that you have with you usually at all times. Yep. And I have my little Metamask and my crypto in there. But you have at all times. That tends to be some form of identity that's associated with it. You then can have a series of different accounts, right? And so having an L2 allows for you to spin out multiple different accounts at a very low cost and use them as smart contract accounts, which means that it allows for you to essentially program how each of those accounts operate. Within each of those, then you can have different forms of sub-identities and have different permissions on how you share the data and information that is associated with those accounts. And so I think the part for us in terms of what that means is that you could then, if you attach your account or your wallet to a given DApp or a given institution, you can then pick and choose what parameters are going to be shared in that specific instance. And if a lot of the kind of side with non-fungible tokens, you can then have essentially an off-chain database with some more of that information that only those constituents can then access. And so it's really the on-chain data that's saying, here's your connectors, but it's only those that have the actual access controls that can access the detailed data in those off-chain events. And so I don't know if that really like answered it, but I think no one's really solved the way of securely doing true identity at this time. We are creating like online identities and your different forms of like what does an identity attach to a single account, but no one's actually solved that off-chain and off-chain access controls in a seamless way yet for us to do it. But I do think like a lot of the account abstraction and the L2s are making it possible for us to actually get there. And so I think we talked about this before, but like the technology is finally at a point this year that I think we can actually execute on all the visions and ideas that people had like a decade ago. And like it hasn't been at that point until we can actually now finally start doing these things.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I know that on our last call we had fun talking about how grocery shopping might change. If you remember the conversation, do you care to elaborate for the audience?
So I think it was we were talking about like the premise of you correct me, but I'm gonna make a guess of what I think we were talking about was you can essentially go in and you can go and you can pay, of course, with your phone. Essentially, you could pay with a crypto wallet very seamlessly to do that, and you could, as a return, your receipt is an NFT. And what's interesting about NFTs is right there they have essentially a bunch of output, and it's all code that you can go and you can get all the details that are associated with that receipt. And so it changes the game in terms of you just getting a paper receipt and you're like, okay, I spent $60. You don't know exactly the details of what you actually spent on. And with an NFT, getting that response, like you could have every single thing, like I bought X amount of bananas and all this. And so you could actually start breaking down like your budget in a much better way. You could also start figuring out like how people are spending in a certain environment or a certain place. And it starts to give you just like essentially superpowers associated with any purchase that you actually make. And it brings together like, as of now, I don't know how many different systems maybe are in place at the moment in order to just like make that happen, right? So you have like credit cards, you have the processing, you have the receipt like companies, and then you have all the ones who are like inputting every single product into the database every single time. Like think about that as all one like solution. And it's just like all of a sudden it's just like it's a game changer, right? Like you don't have to go and repurpose the way that you put in bananas to the system, and then all of a sudden like how you actually go and make the payment and who gets the data and information, and if that becomes open and accessible, the amount of different applications that can use it. And so yeah, I think was that kind of on the realm of what we were talking about?
Actually, it was not, but that was very interesting. And it actually expanded on exactly what we were talking about, which we were talking about it from the vendor angle.
Okay.
How we could go in now that you have account abstraction and you can allocate costs where you would like to allocate them, vendors could start to offer incentives for you to purchase their products. And you could pass on the costs of that. So when you pair that with your version, which is this single pane of glass that the digital wallet creates, you now have a way to access and use that data in one place without any one person having to be responsible for that data.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which to me is like one of the biggest use cases. I mean, that just to rally on that a little bit, the thing that got me interested in tech was working at Marketo and understanding the power of integrations between different softwares to offer a full like vision of who the customer is, right? That's exactly what digital wallets do, just 100x better because you don't have to build anything. You just got to get people to connect the digital wallet, and all of a sudden, all of that data is available.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's like the infrastructure is already there, which makes it go so much faster in terms of what you could build. And to the point, yeah, that I do remember now that we were talking about from the brand side that they could essentially programmably give discounts and like help drive people. And the part two that's starting to pop up, right, is like you're seeing for brands is pretty tough when it comes to privacy with cookies, where they're starting to like not have that much data and information about their users and like what they're doing and who they are. And the whole point here is like with NFTs, it allows for you to determine like who the users are in a systematic way. And then you can essentially target them to hopefully like incentivize them to buy your products. And like that's fascinating too when we start thinking about like how can applications change. So like if you're Nike and you have a user that's buying a bunch of different shoes and they get an NFT that's associated with that, when they get onto their site, onto the Nike site, or walk into even a store and connect their wallet with all these different NFTs, like the whole thing can completely shift and change based off of that. And like there's no way to do that right now. It makes it like very, very difficult to have that.
And by the way, there's an air of consumer protection if we're talking about food, by the way. What does it take to recall a bag of lettuce now? What if every single one of those bags could be tracked to specific customer accounts and that data was very easy to access? Makes it a lot easier to take the unsafe product off the shelves and save the company money for not having to recall every single product they issued.
Yeah, and notify people.
And notify people too, right to their digital wallet. Here's a message. So account abstraction is not an intuitive word. What exactly does account abstraction mean? And then, if you want to get a little technical, talking about 4337, just like what was that jump? What is the big difference there? I know we've kind of alluded to it with the example, but just trying to explain that.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that I do think is like, it's new. And this is like a huge unlocker in terms of us making the user experience much better from the wallet perspective for individuals. So there's a few key parts of account abstraction that really like provide that accessibility. So one of those is this thing called paymasters. And so it makes it so that you can actually determine who does the paying of gas. And so as of now, right, when it comes to anything crypto, it's like when you do the transaction, you have to pay whatever fee that's associated with it. In the like credit card world, it is the merchant that is saying, I'm willing to take the fee in order to help make this transaction go smoothly so that this my customer will buy my goods. And so now with account abstraction, it allows for that to essentially happen, where a consumer can go, they can buy a good, they don't pay any additional fee. It's the merchant that essentially pays the fee. So that's one of the parts that comes into it. The other is a bundler. And so as of now, if you use like Metamask, when you do a transaction, you have to sign every single transaction. And sometimes like you're doing like 5 clicks every single time just to do like one little thing. You can bundle them all together and run the transaction. And so again, like it's I just say yes. And in the background, you can run a bunch of different processes to get the outcome that you want. And so that, again, simplifies it. So it goes back to like swipe that credit card, you do it once, and a bunch of things happen. The other is now merging essentially different types of accounts. And so there's Argent and a few others who are really doing this early on with smart contract accounts. And what this allows is the ability to essentially set up different forms of accounts with logic that's associated with it. And as of today, so MetaMask, we call it an EOA, where you essentially have your password that is going to keep your private key encrypted. And that is the thing that's going to do the sign. It's very rigid. That's like all it essentially does for you. When you talk about smart contract accounts, it allows for you to have different recovery methods. So you no longer need a recovery phrase, like the random 12-word recovery phrase for MetaMask. You can actually start to do
worry
social.
About where it is.
Worry about what it is. Yeah. So you can start doing social recovery. So you just have your friends that set it up. You could start doing Web 2 as your recovery. You can change, depending on each account, you can change your recovery methods depending on like what assets you actually have in there. And then you can also automate some of like subscription like payments. And so all of that, again, like the whole point here is abstract away all the minutia that's associated with trying to make the same, like each transaction function, and make it so that you don't need passwords. You don't need a recovery phrase. You don't need to sign every single transaction. And you can go and, depending on what's in your accounts, change the way in which those operate that are best suited for the type of assets that you have in there and what you actually want as your outcome. And so we can, kind of like an example here is we recently built it where you could send a token to someone, not knowing their wallet address, not knowing if they even have a wallet or their like decentralized identifier. You can just send it through a link. We can spin up a wallet for them in the span of like 30 seconds. And all of a sudden they can take those assets and have them, and they can send them to anyone that they would like. And they did no other form of onboarding, and it's literally just attached to their phone. And at some point, if they want to make it so that if they lose their phone, they can get those funds, they can set up their recovery methods. And it's no longer the SRP or anything, right? It's just using your biometrics, and you can use the social recovery. And so like that is where it really changes the game, because it gets rid of, as of today, like I think the hard part is you need to understand how blockchain works to use the products in the space. And we need to get to a place where no one needs to understand blockchain, and all of a sudden they just get the value. And that's where we're really trying to push things.
I think that the phrase you just said has been said on this show 1,000 times by both me and my guests, but this has been the most interesting and I guess viable evidence of how it's actually happening. We are meeting people where they are now.
Yes. And I think it's better, right? Like I think we can build a product that's better than Venmo, better than like Zelle. Like we are actually, what we've been trying to solve is a lot of the problems in the Web3 space to just like get those things better. And so now I think we're at a point where we can actually solve Web2 problems, right? Which was like the whole point of like using a new technology.
What are the real use cases?
Yeah. We can like actually now solve them, which is super exciting. And it's like literally this year is when this technology is going to become available.
So going back to the kind of taking the fees and being able to program them to who's assuming those fees back to the merchant. Does it also follow that the fees will be reduced, that there'll be lower fees than what we currently like? Because like for a lot of merchants, and their biggest cost is this 3% or more that they're paying to these credit card companies that a lot of people think is not justified at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Does that change as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I think the parts that all come, there's a bunch of things that are all coming together at the same time that really make it interesting, right? And so I think the paymaster part, so who takes the fees, is certainly helpful. But then in terms of actually decreasing it, it's really like the ZK VMs and the L2s. So now all of a sudden you're going from like having to pay mainnet gas costs, which is relatively expensive, to like a cent per transaction, right? And so like when you're thinking about, and your transaction size can be like huge, right? And so like what is that as a percentage? So instead of paying the 3% for credit card fees, you're paying like 0.001%, depending on the size of the actual transaction. And then the other thing that's amazing is because of the difference in terms of who can pay is whatever system you're using could potentially like even subsidize those payments because they're making money in some other method. And so all of a sudden you could essentially, we could, right? If Metamask sitting on Linea, we could essentially make it so that you pay zero for some period of time, as long as you are also staking or doing something else on our system. And like that again becomes very fascinating. Think about like a merchant in Thailand that's like running a street cart. All of a sudden you can, you essentially have like cash, right? This is like the first version of real digital cash that you can give around and essentially have no fee associated with it, and it's instant. Like that is super crazy powerful. And like the individual has full control over it. They don't need to put any form of like KYC. And when they want to send it to someone, if they don't have a wallet already, like in 30 seconds, they have that like digital cash in their phone and attached to their device.
Do you take this? No. Here's a link. Now you do.
Now you add it. It's great. And like pay me in a QR, like everyone's using QR codes, and of course across India and China, like this is already common practice, and there are billions of people already doing this today. And the difference is like you again get like full control. You don't have to like rely on another a third party. You don't have to rely on a bank. You have absolute control of your own assets. And like that, again, is like the really big driver here.
But up to this point, when someone said that, they're like, what do you mean? Are you an anarchist? So it's like, no, I'm actually just going to make your life cheaper and easier. You're welcome. Right?
Exactly.
Like for the first time, you can now say that. Whereas before, that argument always went on, well, I even made a video once where I was like, so you got to download Metamask wallet, and then you got to get your seed phrase, and here's where you want to store it. And like, nope, not anymore. Now it is, you know how to open your phone? Because if you know how to open your phone, you can do this.
You can have it. Yeah. Yeah. And then like the thing that keeps popping up, right? It's like, I don't know, you go to lunch with someone in London, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, how do I pay you if I don't have any cash on me? Say like we split the bill and it was like 50 pounds. Like, how do I give you 50 pounds? Like, it is convoluted to get that to someone without having the actual cash. And like, this makes it so it's a no brainer. It's like, you want 50 pounds here, done in like a second.
I always go back to an example actually with one of your former colleagues, Ian Andrews, where we were explaining that if you want to start a manufacturing company in Nigeria, say, and you have to pay in US dollars because it's a global reserve currency, you can now pay in USDC, and you don't have to wait the 20 to 30 days that these banks take to convert your Naira into US dollars, right?
Yeah.
And then, by the way, your manufacturing costs have changed by then, so I hope you converted a little extra because inflation's out the roof right now. So like, all of that starts to come together, and oh man, that's beautiful. It is nearing the top of the hour, though.
Oh my gosh, could totally keep going.
I know. I have to. You'll have to come back on. I think it's just the solution there, and maybe in person sometime. That would be a lot of fun.
That'd be great.
So I do have my two final closing questions. The first one is, how do you define Web3?
So I think mine is relatively simple. It's any application that's leveraging blockchain technology. I think that's it.
Fair. So the next one's forward looking. It's where do you see yourself in the space in the next 6 to 12 months? And then where do you see yourself in the space in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yes. So I think the next 6 to 12 months is pretty easy. I'm helping drive out this product that we call Metamask Portfolio. I'm a big believer in terms of what we're trying to do with it, which is make it the hub of Web3, so a safe, secure place for people to come back to, kind of like your homepage, and then jump out to kind of the frontier and interact. And then the other part too is like, we want to make it so you never have to use a centralized exchange ever, right? So we can protect people from a BlockFi, an FTX, a Celsius, and again, put that power to the users, but they get to leverage all kind of the value adds that are associated with it. And so next 6 to 12 months is really getting it to a place where anyone and everyone can use the Metamask portfolio and adds kind of like the core primitives that are there to make people feel safe and secure. And we can help onboard a lot of people from that aspect. I think the next 5 to 10 years, like in the crypto space, right? 1 year is already crazy. So we'll see, but I hope I would love to continue driving that aspect of kind of what we were talking about at the end, which is can we really make a game-changing way for funds to be managed and handled and essentially distributed? And that's really where I'd love to be focusing.
Yeah, sounds like we're at a place now where real change can happen, and there isn't the sacrifice of having to learn a entire list of how to keep things safe and how to download certain things and keep them away. I mean, it is a huge barrier to entry to the
so
point
complicated.
where what used to happen is like, Zach, listen, man, like, it sounds like it's really cool. You just do it for me.
Yeah.
Then you got a whole nother creation, because what happens if you don't have that relationship in the future? There's just many things that could go wrong in between there, whether it's them trying to learn how to do it or having, someone that they know and trust at that point in time do it for them, as we've seen with recent happenings. So, Ryan, this has been awesome, man. I've really enjoyed it. I really appreciate you coming on.
Me too. Thanks for having me, Zach.
Thanks for tuning in to Web3 with me. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you want to connect with me personally, you can find me on Twitter @Zach_French_.